Good morning to everyone, and I welcome you all for our, one of the most important and ever looked for session for retinos. And this is a kind of a short video clip for all the presenter here, followed by the discussion from the eminent panelist here. Uh, uh, Jinal, I'll request you for the timer to put it of a 6-minute timer, please. And I will, without, because we have a series of presentation here, so without much time waste, we will move on to our first presenter. And actually, Dr.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Just give me a minute. Sir, according to my schedule, I have it as each speaker will show a case, will show case video of 3 minutes.
No, you put it of 6 minutes. It will include all the cases, including the presentation and discussion in that 6 minutes. So please put the 6 minutes of that.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so I'll just can I request all our panelists and to put their video on. And our first presenter, wish we could have Dr. Mahesh Shanmugam for throughout the period, but sir has to leave for another session, so we will request sir to present as a first case. Dr. MPS, Dr. Mahesh Shanmugam does not need any introduction in the hostile fraternity. Internationally, he is, I think, teacher of all teachers, and he is the savior of all of us. Whenever we face any difficulty, we just go to sir. I think this is enough for his introduction. Sir, Dr. MPS, sir, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Rupak, for a very kind introduction. So all of us learn from each other. Let me share my video.
Sir, you need to speak, yeah, otherwise
if the voice is not visible, heard.
No, voice will not.
Okay, fine. I'll listen to. I'll do that 1 minute.
Yeah, if you can just go back and just speak it.
Yeah, sure. So this is a young lady, a 27-year-old lady, who presented with a combined retinal detachment in the right eye. And she had a lot of fibrovascular proliferation and very thin retina. Because the posterior hair is strongly attached, so we gave an intermittent plasmin and anti-VEGF followed by vitrectomy. So you can see a core vitrectomy being done. And peripheral hyaloid, some areas it was detached, so we are peeling it off. And posteriorly try to do a viscoelastic dissection. So an opening in the posterior hyaloid and injecting viscoelastic and to separate it to some extent. And I thought I may have to do a bimanual dissection, but we are able to do a unimanual dissection. You can see a fold back dissection is what is being done, and the plasmin seem to have helped in creating the plane of dissection. Segmentation and delamination, everything is being done with the cutter itself. The peripheral hyaloid, which is strongly attached. So, very careful dissection, not creating any breaks. So for a large part of the surgery, I managed to get away without bleeding. Now we are trying to do a subretinal subfluid drainage to a transcleral drainage because I didn't want to do a drainage retinotomy, and there's a post-operative appearance at the end of 1 month.
Yeah, thank you, sir. This is a case of SLE with combined retinal detachment, vasoocclusion, and then combined retinal detachment. That's what, no, sir?
Correct, yes.
So how do you feel that it is different from other vasoocclusive phenomenon? And what is age of this patient?
She is 27 years of age.
Okay. Okay.
And the problem was it was a very, very vascular proliferation extending beyond the equator. So we thought like, and the hyaloid was not separated completely. So that was the issue. So we thought we will have difficulty in dissecting the proliferation. And we thought we may lose the eye because it was looking very vascular as well. So that's the reason we thought we'll give an anti-VEGF and plasmin to see if we can lyse some amount of attachments and go to the surgery. I'm sorry, I was not very clear because I could hear my the voice in my ear. So that was the reason of the video.
Doctor, can I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Dr. Mahesh, wonderful presentation. And as I said in the group, I wish after your presentation in the other place, you can come back and join us because your opinions are very valuable.
Sir is moderator.
Anyway, whatever it is, I have a small question for you. So one is, because I have never used plasmin. I am not sure how many of the panelists in this group have used plasmin. Is it same as the oxyplasmin or there's something else which you got?
No, this is an autologous plasma which is taken from the patient's own blood and creating it. Okay. So this is a very old technique that's been described long time ago, and some of the ROP surgeons also use it. So we just take patient's blood and centrifuge it, take the plasma, add urokinase, streptokinase, and these are like, and then wait for a few minutes, warm it up, and then inject it into the eye. I usually inject the plasmin about 2 hours before the surgery. So in the morning, the anti-VEGF, of course, is 3 days before. On the day of surgery, we inject the plasmin and then take the patient up for surgery about 3 hours later. Not in all the patients, because the sterility is of paramount importance, because you're doing a venipuncture and our micro lab people may not be following sterile techniques. So I usually ask one of my fellows to go along and ensure that the sterility is kept assured, and then bring it back to the theater, inject it, and take the patient up for surgery about 2 to 3 hours later.
So you need a lab, proper lab.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask.
Simple,
whether you have your centrifuge close to your OT. That's
no. So centrifuge is okay. Centrifuge, you can have it in your own setup. I have got a centrifuge for different purposes. I'm using it.
So is it possible? So is it possible that if you can just put the blood up and the plasma part you can just inject it off? Will it have the same kind of effect?
No, but as you mentioned, it has to be activated by using a urokinase or a streptokinase. So you have to do that. The technique in brief is you take about 7 ml of patient's blood in EDTA bulb and centrifuge it at 4,000 RPM for 15 minutes. This is a freely available article.
Yeah.
And the vial of urokinase is heated in incubator about 37 degrees for 15 minutes. And 1.8 ml of the plasma is added to 0.2 ml of urokinase mixed vigorously at 37 degrees for about 2 to 3 minutes. And out of this, 0.2 ml is injected into the vitreous cavity. So that's all. So if you have a basic lab which does hematology workup, that's adequate. You just need a centrifuge and you need a streptokinase, urokinase, that's all. You don't need a specialized lab to do this. That's how it is.
Dr. Mahesh, can we use this for bad diabetic TRDs also?
Yes, I have used it for bad diabetic TRDs also. Any patient with a strongly attached hyaloid, you can use them.
This is definitely an eye opener, and as you told, I have seen you earlier also to use this technique earlier and described it. Thank you so much, sir. And this is being a SLE patient, so the follow up how it is, that is a systemic condition. So
yeah, she did well. Subsequently regained about 636 vision, but then the story is not a happy ending. What happened was about 6 months after the surgery and regaining the vision, what happened? She developed arterial occlusion because of SLE, and so this eye lost the vision subsequently. So though we managed to reattach the retina and she regained vision, but because of a systemic condition, she developed an arterial occlusion, and then this eye lost vision. And the other eye I've actually done a vitrectomy subsequently.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So please stay with us for some time at least, and we'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Manish Bapai, and a prolific surgeon from Nasik and trained at Shankar Netsalaya. And Dr. Manish, are you here? Can you please share yours?
Yes, I am here. I'm sharing my screen. Let me know if you can hear the voice. Otherwise, I will.
No, I think you can start talking because.
Okay. So before I start the video, this was a patient who had an industrial accident, and he had fairly good vision, 6/24, I believe. when he presented, and there was no foreign body to be seen. He told that there was something hit and fell out of the eye while working in industry. I did ultrasound. Ultrasound did not show any foreign body, but nevertheless, I got the CT scan done, and the foreign body was so small that it could not be seen in any other frames rather than these two when the scans were taken at 1 mm each. Only these two pictures had the small foreign body in pars plana region. So intraoperatively, I had done phacoemulsification and implanted IOL. I tried to search for the foreign body in ciliary sulcus because it was not, the location was not very clear on CT scan, but the foreign body was not seen in ciliary sulcus and I could see it in the pars plana. So I went in posteriorly and did vitrectomy, complete vitrectomy with PVD induction. I did PVD induction before removal of foreign body because I wanted to do base excision before approaching the foreign body since it was in the pars plana region. So complete vitrectomy was done and base excision was done. The foreign body was seen in infero-nasal quadrant. So here the foreign body can be seen behind the IOL. Complete vitrectomy is done. Now the foreign body is being released from its attachments in the pars plana. And once the foreign body is say, here base excision is being done around the foreign body, and then the foreign body is caught with the vitrectomy cutter. It's held with the vitrectomy cutter in mid-vitreous cavity, and then 25. This was 25 gauge transconjunctival vitrectomy. So I used 25 gauge IL impeding forceps to grab the foreign body first in the behind the IOL, and so this was grabbed with the IL impeding forceps. The cannula on the right side was removed, temporal side, and microcapsular axis forceps was used to shake hand the foreign body and take it out of the eyeball. The case was closed. Eventually, patient did well and had 6/6 vision. So the purpose of the video is to show importance of CT scan even when you do not, even though you are sure that there is no foreign body, it might throw up surprise, and in such cases, combined approach is what is usually necessary. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. Would invite opinion from the panelist, Dr. Mahesh, sir, please.
Yeah, Dr. Rupat, very nicely done surgery by Dr. Manish. So I think the key issues in this patient was probably the peripheral location of the foreign body, which was not very obvious to the clinical examination. So very nicely done with the 25 gauge surgery, with the 25 gauge equipment itself. So I don't use 25 gauge, I use a 23 gauge probably because of the limitations of the equipment which I have, but very nicely done.
So usually, if we don't see any foreign body in ultrasonography, and if you have a clinical suspicion, so the next step is for advising CT scan with overlapping cuts.
Yes, CT scan
or you will go for UBM first.
No, it depends on where we suspect. I wouldn't. UBM is easier to do it if it is in your clinic, so you don't have to send the patient out for a CT scan. So you would probably want to exhaust everything what you have in your clinic before you send the patient out. But the UBM, the only thing is it doesn't localize too well. It can probably give some amount of clock hours, but like the CT scan shows a much better way as to where in the overall scheme of things. But like UBM, the way it cuts are, it's a little, you know that approximately somewhere there. But a CT scan probably gives you a much better localization in that sense of the word.
So, Dr. Rupak, I don't think too many of us would think of doing UBM even if we have access, if we are not seeing the foreign body and it's not picked up on ultrasound when the patient is giving a history that, you know, there is something fell out after hitting. So,
another thing is about the when we are seeing the patient, if it's got an open wound, obviously you're not going to do a UBM.
Yeah, that is a difficult another. Any comment from Dr. Anand?
Yeah, I think fantastic your hand exchange technique and putting it up with the cutter and then changing over, that was quite terrific. I just subscribe to the same theory that, if you suspect a foreign body, the most important thing is the clinical suspicion, and having a CT is very good for all trauma cases, especially also, not in this case, but from medical legal point of view also.
Correct. Point well taken. We'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Vibhuti Kashyap, a third generation ophthalmologist from Ranchi, son of Dr. Bharti and Dr. BP Kashyap. He's a young, dynamic VR surgeon at Ranchi, trained in ocular oncology. Vibhuti, this is the podium is yours.
Thank you so much, sir. I hope I'm audible and visible both.
Yeah, please.
Good morning, everyone. My topic for today would be macular hole causing retinal detachment. So my case was that of a 30-year-old female with both high myopia who underwent left eye pars plana vitrectomy for retinal detachment. She presented with reduced vision in right eye since a month. Examination of right eye revealed macular hole with macular retinal detachment. The retina of left eye was attached post PPV. The OCT of the right eye revealed neurosensory detachment with the macula with a positive full thickness macular hole measuring 270 microns. Now, various techniques of macular hole closure like ILM peeling, inverted flaps, and free ILM transplant previously described in literature would not have helped in this case due to a detached macula. Autologous fibrin could have been effective in such cases, but has a potential risk of infection. Recently, a paper described double ILM insertion technique for such cases where inverted perifoveal flap along with free ILM flap to further secure the insufficient perifoveal flap was done to close such holes. I personally felt that a free ILM flap shouldn't be necessary if a perifoveal ILM, even if slightly deficient, is adequately inverted and tucked in. So accordingly, after performing a phacoemulsification with PCIL implantation, a pars plana core vitrectomy, triamcinolone acetonide assisted PVD induction was performed. The vitrectomy was completed.
I think if you can describe, are you muted?
ILM was stained with BBG dye. The ILM peeling began inferonasally, extending nasally and then temporally. This was the initiation of the peel, which was then extended nasally, keeping it anchored to the whole edge, and then temporally. So in this way, a double inverted flap was created, one from the nasal and one from temporal end. And then these flaps were tucked in the hole for sufficient closure. Which was followed by extension of the ILM peel up to the arcades. Followed by a fluid air exchange and C3F8 gas injection. So the preoperative OCT picture that looks something like this, improved postoperatively on 4th week follow-up to complete anatomic restoration of macular attachment with hole closure with the best rated visual acuity of 636 parts. Thank you.
Yeah, this is absolutely fine technique. We'll take a quick comments from our audience. I think Srinivas, you do this inverse flap technique with. Yes, can you just put your comment here?
Rupak sir, nice technique, Dr. Vibhuti. Sir, actually, one thing I have realized out of my 125 cases of doing multi-layered ILM peeling, with Dr. Ajay describes it as cabbage technique, I describe it as a multi-layered or a petaloid fashion. What I have realized, sir, is to do it under PFCL. See, every time we take it and tuck it inside, it inadvertently touches the RP. And first of all, I'm seeing in my 125 cases, it is causing scarring. ILM itself is causing scarring. and touching it, I feel, will cause more scarring. So that's why I used under the PFCL. So PFCL tries to act like a heavy tamponade. So the flaps go inside automatically. We don't have to do any tucking or stuffing inside the hole, and then tilt the eye a little bit and drain the PFCL. I have never seen any flap coming out. So that is what the slight modification what I have done to, rather than initially I used to do the same thing where Dr. Bibhuti was doing, like taking up all the petals and trying to stuff inside, but that was causing more scarring for me. So later on under PFCL, I'm feeling it very better.
Sir, but sir, with the when the macula is detached, in that scenario, when we tuck it in, we don't tend to touch the base of the hole. Plus, if we inject a PFCL,
I agree with your point, Dr. Bibhuti. When macula is detached, then you can always stuff it inside. But what I'm trying to tell in this technique, where you use the where the retina is flat, in those cases, then it is do it. Even in cases where it is a detached retina with macula, you can always put the PFCL and always do this technique.
Correct.
I would like to. I would like to add a point to what Srinivas said. Nice surgery, Dr. Vibhuti, but tucking is really not needed. Somebody calls it cabbage. I call it the envelope technique. I make 3 or 4 flaps, smaller ones, just invert them on the hole under PFCL, do a FGE, and in the end remove the PFCL, and then let my airstream cover. I've had excellent success even in reg RDs with associated macular hole with this technique, and absolutely no scarring or anything. Even excellent visual recoveries in cases where it was expected to be excellent.
2 quick points. I think that scarring which Srinivas talks about is because of people are over exuberantly tucking it in, and it's actually the forceps which is possibly traumatizing the RP. That is in the flat cases. That's also, to Dr. Vibhuti's this thing, like what Srinivas said, for RD with macular holes, you'll find it easier to put in PFCL, flatten everything, and surprisingly, the counter traction which the PFCL provides actually makes for an easier ILM peeling. And you just need to layer it over, and I think you're done. And in fact, RD with macular holes with this technique, because once the RD settles, it brings actually the tangential traction actually reduces lesser, so there's actually more gratifying results.
I think Dr. Mahesh wants to add a point.
Dr.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Mahesh, you're muted.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Like I agree with all of them, because there's no need to actually tuck in these patients, because the retina is mobile and the edges of the hole do come closer together. So you can just layer it over it and then leave it. That should be fine also.
Right.
Rupak, can I say something? Or
Yeah,
the time is up.
Yeah.
Quick Vibhuti, wonderful presentation. So what I wanted to say was that what we had reported, sometime back, whenever you have 2 flaps coming over each other, and if you look at the electron microscopy of the flaps, and you look at the retinal surface and the vitreal surface, the scanning electron microscopy of these are different. So when you have the flaps overlapping each other, they will join each other like a Velcro. But if you tuck them, they will be little contorted and this joining will not happen. So if you put it over the macular hole, it actually forms a closed compartment. And when it forms a closed compartment, somehow the RPE pump is more effective and the centripetal forces are more effective. So there is a logic for not tucking, and there's a logic that this not tucking will actually enhance the closure of macular. Just 2 cents of my advice.
So usually I don't tuck the holes, but the point is, so usually I don't tuck my holes when the retina is attached. But in this case, because the retina was attached, I felt like not tucking the hole will actually dislodge the flap that will come over the macula once I do the FG.
The thing is, when you
I think Srinivas also will be presenting similar cases, so we'll again have a time for the discussion.
Sure.
We'll move on to our next presenter, Dr. Anirudh. Dr. Anirudh will present GRT with a subretinal crystalline lens. It's a dramatic surgery. Anirudh, he is head of the department and senior consultant at Shustruth Eye Hospital, Kolkata, and joining with us very, very soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Rupagda, for this opportunity. Well, I will be showing one referred complication. Audio is there?
This is the story of a lost nucleus. This patient was referred to the retina department
Yes, yes,
lost nucleus after a complicated cataract surgery. On examination and investigation, it revealed a hemorrhagic choroidal detachment with total retinal detachment. But the nucleus could not be localized even through ultrasonography. We initiated the case by draining the choroidal hemorrhage externally after placing an AC antenna. Wound was properly closed before proceeding with vitrectomy. It showed a giant retinal tear with extensive anterior PVR changes. After doing a core vitrectomy, PFCL was injected to stabilize the posterior pole. Membranes were dissected from the disc to unfold the posterior pole. Even after doing a thorough vitrectomy, the retina couldn't be settled. And the most surprising aspect was that we could not locate the dropped nucleus for which the patient was referred to us. To settle the retina, we decided to perform relaxing retinectomy. While doing the retinectomy, a yellow mass was seen subretinally. Further retinectomy revealed that yellow mass was nothing but the dropped nucleus. We then extended the retinectomy to release the subretinal nucleus, and then with a fragmentome emulsified the nucleus. After removal of the nucleus, 360-degree retinectomy was completed. And laser was performed. One piece of the nucleus went underneath the retina while doing the phagofrag. Which we eventually retrieved and completed the case by direct PFCL silicon oil exchange. We could give the patient from light perception to ambulatory vision of 5/16. Hence, the take-home message from my video is a retinal surgeon should never ever give up. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent show, Yudha. Excellent show. We'll take a quick comment from our panelist, Dr. Manish. And before that, there is a little announcement that Dr. Srinivas also has to leave for another session. So before Dr. Aditya, can I request next is Dr. Srinivas to present? Yeah, Manish.
So I had a question as to how did how the lens must have ended up in.
I think there was.
They tried to do a lot of fishing of the.
There was a lot of manipulation, maybe, which created the giant retinal tear. And this patient actually presented 3 weeks following the surgery. So might be through the giant retinal tear, the nucleus has migrated subretinal. So that's a possibility. In fact, it is a message to the anterior segment surgeon not to manipulate. So this kind of worse scenario might actually arise.
And ultrasound revealed.
Actually, there was a choroidal, suprachoroidal hemorrhage. The globe, there was GRT. So definitely the ultrasonography was not very clear. There was obviously a clinical suspicion because the patient was referred for dropped nucleus. But it was actually a disorganized globe, it seems to be.
Excellent surgery under the situation. I think you did a fantastic job.
The cornea condition was also pretty bad. You can see from the video that it was a little bit hazy.
Yeah, understand. Dr. Chawla, please. I think you wanted to.
No, I think it's a beautifully done surgery and one should never give up, and GRT must have been responsible. And the early setting in of PVR was because of the associated hemorrhage and because of over manipulation.
Inflammation. Yeah.
The whole surgery could have been much easier without the associated PVR and the nucleus on top.
I agree with you. If we can we move on to our next presenter, Dr. Srinivas. I think he also does not need any introduction, and senior VR surgeon at Dr. M.M. Joshi Eye Hospital, Hubli, and he is director of research at M.M. Joshi Eye Hospital. Srini, can you start? Unmute yourself, Srini.
Thank you, Rupakda, for involving me in this interesting session. So I'll be just presenting a case of recurrent. This was a 62-year-old diabetic patient who underwent vitrectomy with membrane surgery for PDR. This was a pretty simple case, not a difficult one. And you can see I just tried to remove the prolif over the disc, and the surgery was pretty much completed. But he came 1 year later with a macular hole. And unfortunately, because of the lockdown and the COVID scenario, he had drop in vision from 6.9 to 6.60, and he delayed in coming up. And when I looked upon, it was probably because of the reproliferation which has happened here that has caused this hole. You can see here it was 700 micron in diameter with a basal diameter of 1,319. So when I tried to remove this membrane, I just tried to do it unimanually. And while removing this membrane, I had a small vessel burst here. Then I thought, okay, I could stop it, but I didn't want it to cauterize it since it was very close to the macula. I used the PFCL and tried to increase the pressure in between for some time. He was one-eyed. I didn't want to take risk on increasing too high. Then I went ahead with a neurosensory graft. I don't have like what Dr. Rupak sir has the punch. So I just went ahead and make the blister and tried to peel it, cut it bimanually, and under the PFCL, I tried to place it. So after doing this, I could see the bleeding was slightly increasing. You can see your left-hand side, I was in between, juggling between 25 and 60, the pressure, it was not stopping. And finally, at the end, you can see there, I couldn't see where was the graft and blood, because the moment I tried to do anything to the blood, it would have enlarged the macular hole. It was so sticky that it could have enlarged. So I just left it like that, leave the blood like that. And I was hoping that at least it is centered, because the blood was so this thing, I couldn't see where was the macular hole in that case. But somehow I tried to place it and thought it that to be the center of the macular hole. I did a fluid air exchange. And then this was the pre-op, and this was the post-op 1 month. And final visual acuity in this patient who came very recently, I saw him from 660 improving to 6/9. And this is his fundus picture. And he's pretty much doing well, a single-eyed patient, a very happy patient.
Fantastic, fantastic surgery. Srinivas, I think sometimes God, helps you in some other way. So probably that bleeding also could have helped, in sticking that graft over that area.
That's what I brought it this for discussion. How much will really blood actually help it? Because we have seen separate cases where neurosensory graft also helps. Right. Some authors have reported blood also helps. Here it was a combo. So I don't know how to attribute what to this in this case.
But we can see the graft in your last OCT, the graft is in position. So probably the blood has actually hold it
correct.
There.
Yeah. So I think Srinivas, both God and blood helped you.
And Dr. Srinivas, how much visual recovery do you attribute to the graft? Because in graft cases, we don't have that much, but where we use plasma and an ILM flap, recovery is better. Though my experience with graft is hardly any. I just want to ask that for...
I truly agree, sir. Sir, but if you ask me sincerely and honestly, I feel the results are now slightly better with the grafts. I feel these flaps are causing scarring. Inadvertently, I don't know, sir. Somehow they, in most of
I agree.
Even though I don't touch it, they're somehow causing, because of course if you look into the literature also, it is probably because of the glial cell proliferation or the histiocytes or the fibrocytes. Probably it's all inflammatory cells which from the Muller cell foot processes which is trying to do that. It's a gliotic proliferation which is probably going to happen. But this graft, once it integrates, sir, then I do see the good integration as well as.
So if you have a 800 micron, if you have a 800 micron or 1000 micron hole today, your first surgery will be a graft surgery straight away?
No, sir. I would rather go with the inverse ILM flap technique first, as much non-invasive as possible. In case I don't have any ILM inverse flap, then I go with the grafts.
Yeah, we'll take a quick comment from Dr. MPS. Sorry, Dr. Ajay, I will take your comment.
No, I just was going to mention what Shobit said, because this patient, the hole developed because of a localized proliferation and traction. So was it, would you have thought of releasing the traction which you did, allowing the hole to close, putting an ILM flap, and then going at a second stage is required for the neurosensory graft? Or because you become so proficient with the neurosensory graft that you're wanting to do it immediately as a primary procedure have sort of shortened?
A good question, Ajay sir, but the hole size was more than 700 microns. So I don't think after peeling the fibrovascular proliferation, the hole could have closed. But of course, I did not try the free flap. Instead, I preferred using the neurosensory graft in this case.
So my quick comment here would be that, I think that this graft technique, I've done a few anatomical successes there, visual not as much, but I think it should be for cases where you have failed with ILM peeling and then you don't have any option. Then that's a justified procedure. Here, I would just add that, perhaps that point where you pulled off that FP, instead, if you had cut it with the scissors, you wouldn't have had that bleed in the first place. But I think the bleed helped you in ultimately.
True.
Yeah. So we'll take a quick comment from Dr. MPS, sir.
No, regarding the clot, when the concept of ILM peeling was not there when we used to do macula hole, we used to actually tease out the macula, and if there was a clot, you will happy, because that actually used to act as a template for the hole to close. So this is before the concept of ILM peeling. So the clot does work like a template over which it grows, or a scaffold over which it grows as well.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, we'll take it that. We'll move on to our next presenter, Dr. Aditya. Dr. Aditya Kelkar, Director of National Institute of Ophthalmology and a prolific surgeon, does not need any introduction, and receiver of last year Red Buckler Award from ASRS. Aditya.
Thank you, Dr. Rupak, for including me in this instruction course. I'll be presenting a small case where I had an opportunity to treat a 3-year-old child who came to us with a white reflex in the eye, and on examination we found that the patient has Coats disease with exudative retinal detachment. The anterior segment was normal. The plan was to go in and do an external drainage, and as we started doing the drainage, we realized that the SRF is quite thick and it's not coming out easily, and so we altered our plan, and this is the video which shows the altered plan of Coats disease with modified external drainage. So I went in with 3 ports. First of all, one was to, just in case a vitrectomy is required, and then the infusion cannula was started. An external drainage was attempted. However, the drainage was not easy. So we went in, did a small pore vitrectomy to begin with, to ensure that we have enough space to inject perfluorocarbon liquid inside the eye, so that the fluid will press the posterior pole and then the SRF will move anteriorly, and then the drainage would become easier. So as we did inject the PFCL, and then the drainage was more efficient. And as you can see, I just made a small opening with the 25 gauge needle trocar, and then the SRF drainage happened very efficiently. And then obviously the retina started regressing. The intraoperative OCT shows a fibroglial nodule at the posterior pole. After the sufficient drainage was done, I tried to do some peripheral vitrectomy as well. And then a cryopexy was done to the angiomatous vessels. In fact, in this case, after the PFCL was removed, I went in and did a PVD induction. So it was slightly a different way of doing vitrectomy in these cases. So here you see the cryopexy being done. So what we exactly did in this case was inject PFCL, drain the subretinal fluid externally, remove PFCL, do a PVD induction using Tricort assisted maneuver. And then after that, this is the end results. So the retina is attached and the patient is doing well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Fantastic surgery, Aditya. And comment, please.
Very nicely done surgery. The thing is, like I would usually, if I have to do this, I would usually use a needle drainage technique. So use a 26 gauge needle connected to a syringe with the plunger removed, and you can visualize with the biome, and then you can depress from outside and see the needle tip entering into subretinal space. So that way you can go quite posterior and drain it. So what happens is a shifting fluid. So when you do a cut down and roll the eye, the fluid moves to the other side. So, but the needle drainage technique, then you can go posterior and drain it quite well. And like a simple laser treatment would have been adequate. A cryo is not required because what we are aiming at is to treat the vascular anomalies, which will still absorb the green laser energy. So even if the retina is not attached, we can still treat the vascular anomalies, make them blanch, and then that works much better. That was very nicely done, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your inputs.
Yeah. Sir, one more just question: whether the presence of giving Ozurdex at this point of time have any role here?
Yeah. So I did give. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So in fact, I did IVTA injection at the end of it. However, I was little cautious because this is only a 3-year-old child, and the chances of cataract development would be there in this patient anyway because it's a vitrectomized eye. But I did give IVTA at the end of the procedure.
Okay. Dr. MPS, I have a question from you. If you have a small sector with traction elevated after you've done all the surgery in this and the angiomatous area there, would you consider a V-shaped retinectomy or not? Because some surgeons like to flatten it there and do a V-shaped retinectomy in that anomalous area. But I'm apprehensive about doing it in kids. So I wanted to know your opinion.
You're asking me, Dr. Shobit?
Yeah.
I would not like to do a retinectomy at all, like you very rightly said, because that means you need to put an oil and it becomes very messy. So if at all, I would probably put a segmented buccal and support it because these children may not have a great visual outcome. And in that, like you're complicating it by doing a retinectomy and PVR would not be a great idea. Yeah.
So segmental buccal would be.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Aditya. We'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Shobit Chawla. And sir also does not need any introduction. He is also teacher of teachers, and he by his he is one of the pioneer of our Vitreoretina Society, and with his all support and his contribution today, the Vitreoretina Society, what we are seeing now, he is here, and sir is currently presently president of Vitreoretina Society. Sir,
this small presentation and video sums up my philosophy of treatment of myopic macular traction maculopathy. This is a young female. She came with this kind of picture to me, and with the MMT, the vision in the left eye was 612, and we could identify an area of traction temporal to the fovea, and the fovea had just developed schisis. I explained the patient the possibility of surgery, but I was not very enthusiastic. At this stage, I also told her to wait. A young patient, 612 vision. He was having visual symptoms, but I told her we can definitely watch for a couple of months. She came. She could not come earlier. She came 1 year later with this picture, 636 vision, and the traction had become more, and this myopic macular schisis also had gone up. And then we did a surgery, which I like to routinely do in these cases, rather than I'm not that much a proponent of macular buccal surgery. Even if no hole is associated, or even if a hole is associated, I like to do this technique. What I do, whatever you want to call it, I call it the envelope flap technique. I like to fortify the cystic area of the fovea with a couple of flaps. I make the flaps small. I may or may not peel over the maculopapular area that much. In this case, I have done. Then I go to where the traction was, because here later on the traction is also developed on the nasal side. Here it was clinically visible, the traction as a ridge on the ILM, and I did a wide peel and a temporal relaxing ILM peel. And just left the patient with 20% sulfur hexafluoride. And this was our picture 1 week post-operatively. The traction had gone and a fairly good result. ILM flaps could be seen in the post-operative, and 3 weeks later, visual acuity was 618 plus. And last I saw her, she had regained her 612 vision and was still improving and totally asymptomatic. So this is my current technique for quite a few cases. My first 3 cases I had done non-foveal sparing peel, but now I do a foveal flap peel rather than a foveal sparing peel. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's an excellent surgery. Sir, there are 2 questions to you first. One is, you have done a much more larger size of peeling compared to a standard macular hole technique. So is it to have a more relaxation for this myopic traction?
If you see my second OCT, it shows widespread traction. And actually, I could clinically see the traction under the microscope when I was putting the light, that the ILM was under stretch and traction. So I like to always, in my macular hole also, I believe that if you relax the temporal raphe area better, your failure rate, which is already quite less, is even less. And that gives there is a philosophy which says there is a retinal shift which takes place when you're closing a hole. And I feel it is better, and the surface tension effect of the gas bubble is also.
A quick comment there, Rupert, is that in these cases, the myopia, because of the myopia, the AP traction, anteroposterior traction, much more. You see on the OCT, some of these cases are like you're sitting in a well. And so you need to do a relax that traction by increasing the peeling area as much as is possible to a wider extent, arcade to arcade if possible. As Dr. Shobhit said, you see very often the traction going, the slices going right across up to the temporal areas. So this is in fact one of the most difficult surgeries, if you ask me.
I've done eight cases with this technique and 3 with the non-foveal sparing, and I found the results of this technique very consistent. And I feel like in optic pit in a skytic fovea, at times we develop a hole. When it settles down, those flaps in place safeguard you against that.
I think this was the second question, that whether combining with macular buckle will help in these kind of cases, or primarily a macular buckle itself can help in this myopic tract MMT.
I'm sure primary macular buckle, for those who do it, there is one surgeon, I'm forgetting his name, at SN, who's routinely doing macular buckle.
Actually, Pradeep could not join us. Pradeep was also in the list today, so I wanted him to be here.
And also Dr. Carlos Mateo, whose surgery I have watched. Barcelona also routinely does it, but he combines it with an island and with a buckle, and of complete vitrectomy with island. But
I feel Pradeep sir, thank you so much. I think we'll have the biosimilar section now.
I have found that you need to be muted.
It's been divided into 2 in the same thing. One is the glaucoma and next one is the biosimilar. That's what
Srinivas, you need to mute.
And I just wanted to ask.
Can you put Srinivas's mute, please?
Srinivas is too
okay, Dr. Ajay, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask Shobhit one question, which we have we've done about 8 cases now where we've had this, but we always want to do biometry first. If the length of the eyeball is more than 28 to 29, so 30 millimeters, then I've done 3 cases of macular buckle which we fabricated ourselves. My question to you is that if you have a posterior staphylomas with a myopic foveus thesis, won't a combined surgery be a better alternative than doing just this thing? Because I've had failure with a posterior staphloma with a myopic foveus thesis where a macular buckle was done with a combined vitrectomy and it worked. So this is just a question whether you follow some sort of a...
I do follow. I look at the length, and I have done with staphloma one case, which had and that case was successful, and that had a small macular hole also. My flaps were quite aggressive in that, and I covered the hole well. Yes, I use silicone oil in that patient. Normally, I don't use silicone oil in these patients. It's always...
There's a wonderful paper by Pradeep which has come up in IGO this month, June.
I'll have a look.
You must see it. It's a wonderful paper where they talk about these issues and what...
Sir, Rupak sir, sorry to barge in. Just one quick question to Shobhit sir and all the panelists here. Sir, I'm also a big fan of doing fovea sparing, ILM peeling, myopic foveus cases. So recently I had a case, I did it, and that case, I did a fovea sparing. He was from 6'6", he went to 6'12". So I thought there is a diminution of vision, and it was a lamellar hole, almost causing full thickness hole. I went ahead and did a vitrectomy, fovea sparing and everything. He was doing very well for 3 months. And next, he had such a bad recurrence, his vision fell to 3/60. And he was also having staphyloma posteriorly. So I'm now regretting, why did I touch that case? Especially when there is a posterior
That was a case where you had to do a macular buckle with it. Maybe.
Yeah, so probably so that's why I brought that question. So probably when you have the more of a macular, the traction is less, and you have a more of a contour is more. So in that cases, probably you will you better to combine it with macular buckle. And if you have a more of a traction, and rather than the contour of the globe is not that curved, so probably we can get away without macular buckle.
There are some Japanese papers also to this effect, where they have followed up these patients even by doing MRIs and see whether they should do a buckle or only a ILM surgery.
Thank you, sir. We'll just move on to our next presenter, Dr. Anand Rajendran. He is another person who does not need any introduction, and he is Chairman Scientific Committee of our Vitreoretina Society, and he is Professor and Head of the Department of Vitreoretina Services at Aravind Eye Hospital, Chennai.
So, thank you, Rupak, for having me in this exhilarating session. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, we are able to see it.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is another double jeopardy where macular hole is being corrected, and you're doing the the multi-flap technique, multiple ILM peel, and you can see right at the edge of that screen, like a predator waiting out there. There's a little foreign body out there, and you see the peel is going on fairly regularly. It's multi-flap technique, and a little bit of hemorrhage, which is fine. And as we say, we're layering the the flaps over the hole, not really stuffing it in, and things are going on quite well. And you see that little shrapnel out there a little more clearly now. Yeah, you see that bit of the flap has come off, that's removed, and at this point you see that shrapnel, the predator is kind of coming towards the macular hole. And at this point, it's understood that this shrapnel was a piece of the cutter fragment. And this trimming, now while you're trimming that, actually that suction is actually causing the thing to come closer. And at this point, you're trying to get that into the cutter, which was actually not really the great thing to do, because that suction actually brought and drew that fragment into the macular hole. And now you have a major problem. It's sitting inside the macular hole amidst all those flaps. And now in a quandary, and then first going with PFCL and then trying to, tease that out. And, worry is that you might dislodge the flaps, or you might even remove all of them. The PFC bubble at the same time is going down, as you can see. So, so the pulse is, racing, going through the roof. And at this point, we move over and under PFCL, go with the forceps to very gingerly trap that. This is the point where you can actually damage a lot of RP, but no, that doesn't happen. You manage to extract that shrapnel piece and then just pull it off the eye. So just something that can happen. Be careful. This is what happens when sometimes you reuse cutters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to, on a lighter note, I just wanted to ask you, do you play golf?
Me? Golf? No.
Yeah. So nicely you have put that ball into the hole. So a comment from our other panelist. Anirudh, would you like to have any comment here?
The very situation is very bad, but managed extremely well. Great surgery.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Sir, most of the times when we start taking it out, sir, Anand sir, did it come out through the same trocar, or sometimes it again slips back?
Same trocar. Just the right hand. Yes.
Very small.
Yes. The issue is also about grabbing it. This was actually done by a colleague of mine. This came off wells. Very often it gets stuck in that if it's irregular. So that can happen.
Anand, wonderful surgery. My pulse was racing when you were trying to pick it off. I was watching it. Only question I had.
Should I come with a disclaimer, not for people with a weak heart?
Okay, so the only question I had was so I've had a situation like this when the tip of a cutter broke off and there was a shrapnel-like thing. But usually when it happens, the cutter stops functioning well. So the sound of the cutter changes.
Yes.
So did it happen like this?
No. It's not noticed. It is actually a longitudinal part of the shaft. So actually about 2/3 of the shaft was actually functional. So which is what you saw, that the vitrectomy was going on well. And the suction aspect, everything was okay. It is just a linear fragment, and that's what actually helped in grabbing that. If it was an irregular small board kind of thing, it would have been more difficult.
So it happened.
But then it was like a knife in the bed of the hole.
5-6 years back, and then I looked at how these cutters are manufactured, and I went to Alcon site and talked to the Alcon people how they do that, and then I realized actually the tips are fused together. It's not a single piece.
Yeah.
So it will always
we brought it to the attention of the, it was Alcon cutter. We brought it to the.
Sir, instead of going with the forceps, of course, you have a very deft hands and you're a wonderful surgeon. What about using the magnet in these cases?
It doesn't come off with a magnet.
Sorry, magnet?
Yeah.
At that point of time, we didn't have a magnet which would go
No, it won't come off with a magnet.
It may not be, may not be magnetic enough.
No, because it's a metallic piece, sir.
Yeah, but the tip of Alcon cutters, I've tried this. It didn't work out for us when we were taking off with a magnet. So we had to pick it up with a fork.
And this was we didn't have that 25 gauge. 25 gauge.
It's a combined steel, so the iron component may not be that significantly high to grab it.
Maybe.
Actually, I would like to share one experience. One of my colleagues had an experience of breaking the ILM peeling forceps, actually. In this case,
sorry?
The ILM peeling forceps was broken and it was landed into the retina while doing an ILM peeling.
Yeah, usually one of the tips.
That's tough.
So we can
very often have in the soft tip, the flute actually, that silicone thing comes off. I've had that experience too.
The ILM peeling forceps, one flank of the ILM peeling forceps.
Okay.
Soft tip before using when the foreign body was getting dragged towards the macula. Would the use of soft tip instead of cutter would have helped it better to keep it away?
So, no, that's what was initially tried, but it didn't come through. It just didn't come through.
Thank you. It's an excellent presentation and well documented. We'll move on to our next presenter, Dr. Ajay Arora, Director of Eye Center at Noida. And he does not need any introduction. An innovator, and he is throughout his career he is the award winner, starting from his early school days. So, Dr. Arora, please.
So can you see my presentation? Is it visible?
Yes, yes.
I'm audible. So this is a case which I wanted to present something else, but this was interesting, which I recently did. It's a patient who had come to us with a globe rupture, traumatic aphakia, aneurysm, and vitreous hemorrhage. So he's an 18 years old male who had a road traffic accident on 12th of May. He was treated conservatively elsewhere. He had a perception of light with an inaccurate PR. IOP was low. And you can see here the patient had hypema, there was aniridia. So we thought, okay, let's take him up for surgery.
My friend asked.
And at this point, when I opened up, I found there was a huge scleral dehiscence. So I decided that, look, let's postpone it, probably get a graft because graft was not immediately available. And we then took him up for surgery. So this is, just wanted to show you the surgery. So we are doing, we did a layered dissection of the conjunctiva, the tenons, the entire uveal tissue was abscised. So you could find that there was a large scleral tear close to the superior rectus. We got a graft. It was a pretty large area, so we had to get 2 grafts which were put up with the Prolene sutures, because otherwise it is impossible. So this is the superior end, this is inferior, and then we had to do a temporal vitrectomy.
Yeah, fine.
So this was just another challenge with the nose coming in the middle. Went ahead and did a vitrectomy. Fortunately, the retina was actually attached where there was subretinal heme, but there's a peripheral little fraction, but manageable. We removed the entire vitreous and had to change my hands in between areas for doing laser, which managed to complete most of it. The main purpose of this presentation is just for to show that whenever you have a large scleral tear where you're not able to suture it, we have to put a graft that we have to switch the port. So here there is a fluid exchange being done. Subsequently filled it up with silicone oil, though it is attached retina, but I felt that I will be able to complete the laser. And this is because patient had aniridia, went ahead and created a Prolene mesh for silicone retention. I have now done it in about 4 cases, and it works out fairly well. So after having created this mesh, this is almost coming to the end of the surgery. We sutured the layers back with tenons coming first and the conjunctiva. And this is how it looked. And to put in a small gas bubble in the AC so that the oil goes back. First day the patient lies on the back, and subsequent days the patient is again put on face down. So this is what the picture was on day 1. This has just been recently. So this is a split lamp picture. This is on the fundus camera. We did OCT, which was a radial scan on a right side reflex, and this is the fundus photograph. Patient visual acuity on day 1 was 360. Intraocular pressure was 9. Cerebral graft was in place. Silicone fill dye. There was no identifiable peripheral break, and the patient retina was flat. So essentially, these are the take-home message. Scleral dehiscence with the uveal prolapse can usually be managed by switching the cerebral edges. All tissues dissected in layers. The nasal placement of the cannula and temporal vitrectomy is possible. Nose can be managed. It's not very noisy. And in presence of aphakia, we can have a Prolene retention tissue with possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. This is a very, very, encouraging video of not only the salvaging the eye, but you are not giving back vision to that, badly traumatized eye. Sunil, Dr. Sunil, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, it's first couple of things done very well. One is the availability of the donor sclera. Sir looked at the usage of donor sclera. Sir, I have a question. If you don't have an access to donor sclera, any other alternatives you would have thought of?
So, we had amniotic membrane graft lying with us. That's the only thing. I don't do, you could actually also pick up do a superficial scleral dissection from another site on the same eye or from the other eye. People have done it. They have taken a scleral graft and tried to put it over the thing. People have also done closure with phenons and conjunctiva alone and not use the scleral graft. But I decided to defer it, go back to the eye bank. So the surgery was scheduled on Saturday, but I didn't operate. Got the graft, operated on Monday, and we had the graft available. So postponing by a day did not matter because anyway it was a 1 month old.
Yeah, I think that it's a great surgery. I've also had experience of doing a few cases like this. The scleral graft actually gives that tensile strength. Almost, I think about a month back, I did a similar case where there was almost a 180-degree dehiscence and almost the uveal tissue was collapsing out. And it is this scleral graft really gives you that tensile strength to hold back the contents.
As well as extra protection in that area.
The Anand, how did you suture that up? Because what is described in literature that on the limbal side, you can use Vicryl on the and on the away from the limbus you use nylon. But I've used Prolene Nino because I thought that.
No, I used nylon.
I've used
and it's taken up very well because you want that permanently there for a long time. So I use Nino, not Nino, nylon.
I use Nino-Prolene.
All true.
Ajay, did you notice any unusual inflammatory reaction in the post-op period when with the Prolene sutures which you put in to retain the oil? In the 2 cases I have done, in one case I had inflammatory reaction. It was an eye with RD with PVR and iridia.
So, Shobit, there was a patient whom I operated in 2016 where I first did my first Prolene suture mesh, and that was a patient who improved to 6'9" with Prolene mesh suture. Subsequently, and he had oil in place. I think this inflammation actually, so the Prolene mesh, how it works is there is a little heme and inflammation, and that forms a membrane on the Prolene mesh. The Prolene mesh alone doesn't work. It's the heme and membrane which forms on the Prolene mesh that works as a barrier, preventing the oil from coming in front. So somehow, what the limited experience I had with about 4 eyes, I can say that there was no unusual response to the Prolene mesh, but I don't know, maybe this case will be different, so I'll be very watchful.
Corneal decomp and then...
Yeah.
So the corneal decomp is not because of Prolene mesh, I think it's because of the trauma itself.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just move on. I know we have to discuss a lot of things. If we get time at the end, we'll again come back. We'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Unni Krishnan. Unni is here. I saw Unni. And yeah, Dr. Unni Krishnan, Medical Director of Chaitanya Eye Hospital and a prolific ear surgeon and our good friend, Unni.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just a small, it's a very simple modification. So it was a 43-year-old man who had a 15+ year history of retinal detachment, low IOP. It was the both eyes, the other eye effect was affected centrally. So and with a total cataract, this is what the eye looked like. And this is just start the surgery and describe what we did. So total RD, PVR changes, significant PVR changes were there. So this is when we cleared the vitreous, we did the fluid air exchange, and you can see because the traction is not relieved, the air is going underneath the retina at this point of time. So I took, as usual, we took a relatively put the patient back on fluid, and we took an early decision to go for a retinectomy. And what we planned in this patient was a 360-degree retinectomy, basically. And you can see the air bubble moving all around the place. So we partially filled with stabilizing the posterior pole. We filled it, and we started the retinectomy. The way I do 360 is I leave small tags while going around so that the retina doesn't twist or turn. So that's proceeding with the cauterized area with the cutter all around, and freeing the retina, and then freeing the tags in each place so that the PFCL, while slightly increasing the amount of perfluorocarbon. So the tension was more in the temporal area, and while that happened, I had a slippage of PFCL underneath the retina at this point of time. So there was a little bit of maneuvering to take out the subretinal PFCL. So that was, it came off after folding the retina. We could take off the subretinal PFCL. And then the anterior flap, whatever was left of the anterior retina was cut, and a full fill PFCL was done. And we proceeded with laser. Now you can see that that's a toxoplasma scar over there that you see just infratemporal. A 360-degree laser was done to the small area. And what I did differently, and what I think should be a technique in our mind, is that I left PFCL inside for 10 days. So that is the advantages of this is that there is no slippage, there is no chance of rotation of the retina, and this is 10 days later, we went back inside. Here you can see the reasonably good chorioretinal atrophy appearing all around. You can see the chorioretinal and right, and I just put one more small layer just to prove that the retina is attached over there, essentially. So we've got a very small retina, but an attached and quite a safe retina over there. And this is what the advantages I thought of this technique is, that there is no intraoperative slippage or rotation, reduced surgical time. While doing the retinal RP, there's no separation after the laser. The retina is kept intact, nil need of a face down position, and quite a significant reduced secondary, gliotic changes in the first 10 days at least. So thank you, sir. Let's, we can have a good discussion of this.
Excellent point for discussion. Would like to ask Dr. Aditya is here. Would like to ask Aditya, what is your take on like initial those cases of like severe PVR, and we don't have the access of the Densiron as of now. So earlier we could have done these things with the same kind of maneuver with Densiron. Aditya is not here.
Yeah, just a quick comment. So this is a technique which championed by Steve Charles, and he's repeatedly talked about it. He follows it very regularly, and for all, even just GRTs, whether it's superior, inferior, nasal, he uses this, and they've had good results with this. So this is something which in Australia also they've been using this for quite some time.
I think Manish is also doing this technique routinely. Yeah. Manish Nagpal.
Yeah, so this is basically something we learned in Sydney when I was doing fellowship. So it's a common technique in GRTs where the surgical time is very low. You just leave it inside. 7 days you take it outside, and only half of the times you require gas after that. Most of the times you just fill with air and it's done. Another indication is inferior PVRs. So it is wonderful for inferior PVRs where the oil meniscus is not going to support the inferior, even if you do a really good fill. So when you have to do a retinectomy inferiorly, fill it with PFCL, and patient can sit down, stand up, no need for a face down position. It's quite comfortable for the patient. Again, meticulous is that the retinectomy has to be of the adequate size. That is the only meticulous thing. Otherwise, you will have a slippage of PFCL underneath if the patient changes position. So a lavish retinectomy is the key for a good short-term tamponade with PFCL.
Any economy of retinectomy?
Fully
agree with you.
Wonderful technique. We've done it in few cases. Just a question. All of you are very dynamic young surgeons. Would you have ever thought of putting in a belt buckle and not doing any retinectomy at all?
In this particular patient, I don't think.
No, I'm just asking as a mute question, because when you showed that fluid air exchange, a little bit of air going behind.
Yeah.
I may have, in those many years back, in such a situation, we would probably go back, slip in a belt buckle, see and how it responds. Then again, do it. It takes a little time. Retinectomy would be faster. Just a mute question. We have done it in the past. Many years back, I would have done it, put in a belt buckle, and then if it doesn't work, then maybe do it.
Yeah, I agree with you, because today morning also Dr. MPS was explaining in those cases, even putting the segmental buckle in localized PVR area, especially inferior PVR, putting a segmental buckle in that area helps in other way. But the concept is here is a different. Whether can we put it a PFCL in this kind of situation and get away when you really need to do a large or 360 degree RR. So these are the situations where actually probably you can do it for a better outcome.
I think in these cases there is intrinsic contraction of the retina. So by giving support from outside, I don't think these are the cases which would end up with a retinectomy.
Yeah, I just agree to that in the sense that, like what Mary said, there's a lot of intrinsic shortening. So what you actually need for a buckle is a very big band. You need a 276 or something, and that also with very good shortening to really bring that in front. And you can't do it once you've got your vitrectomy ports in. It's difficult. After that, you can only just slip in a small band. So you have to plan.
Yeah, Dr. Anand rightly told.
A better idea and concept is to put an inferior buckle in inferior PVR cases, even if you are doing, and especially in high myopic eyes, even if you are doing limited or an extensive technique, it works well.
Plan it ahead.
Inferior buckle, all round encirclage is really not needed.
Broad buckle
and in young patients, especially in young patients.
Yeah, PFCL works very well.
And even in
indication is RD with CDs. This is something which helps.
And only how do you position these people? Do you tell them to have any position?
No, they're strict on their back for the first 24 hours.
Right.
Then we tell them that what I advise this patient is no sudden movements.
Okay.
So that is the most thing.
But they can be on their own too.
They can be on there. See, there are places when in our country, what is the worst thing that can happen? The patient doesn't come after 7 to 10 days. That is the absolute worst thing, and you leave PFCL inside the eye.
Yeah.
So in Australia, it wasn't a bother, but here I have recommended admission for 7 days.
Yeah,
so that
is something that is really an important thing that he's voiced. I think that is something people, when they're starting this, they should really consider that. Yeah. Also, very strong informed consent at the start.
Yes.
They will come. This surgery is a 2-stage procedure.
Yeah. So I think this was being done by the Payman group almost about 20 years back. Dr. Nagpal used to do it, and the patient used to remain admitted in the hospital for about 7 days. With the PFCL was put, and he was moved from the OT to the room on a stretcher and remained like that.
Yeah. We don't have much time. We'll just move on to our next presenter, and Dr. Sunil is our next presenter. He is director of Davangere Nethralaya and professor at BMC. And Dr. Sunil is having his chairman. He was chairman scientific committee of Karnataka Ophthalmology Society and now joint secretary. Sunil.
Now I'll be presenting a case of a trauma. This is an edited video. Patient had a corneal tear with a traumatic cataract with an intraocular foreign body. This is post, we had done the corneal tear repair and lensectomy. After that, 3-port pars plana vitrectomy with the chandelier assisted. You can see a vitreous hemorrhage being cleared. There is a macular intraocular foreign body with a posterior pole tear with the surrounding perifoveal tissue edema. Careful PVD induction is done to make sure that there is no enlargement of the tear all around the tear. The concern here is whether it is any adhesions or impaction of the foreign body and the degree of damage to the choroid underneath the choroid. Once you have done that, peripheral vitreous base shaving was done. Now we need to tackle the posterior pole. The bubble of PFCL was put to prevent the safeguard on the macula, and the foreign body was gradually removed, and there was an adhesion which was slightly smaller adhesion which was released. There was a minimal ooze which was controlled with PFCL bubble and rising the bottle height. And foreign body was tried to remove by a hand and shave handshake technique using 2 forceps, and it was planned to remove it through the pupillary, brought to the pupillary margin, tried to keep it on the iris surface, it fall off. But luckily there was a PFCL bubble, it didn't cause any damage to the macula. Viscoelastic was put to protect the endothelium. Once again, the foreign body was brought again to the pupillary area, and by handshake technique, it was removed through the limbal corneal, clear corneal wound. Limbal wound was sutured. Now the concern is to take care of the posterior pole tear. After doing a peripheral vitreous base excision and other things, we planned for an ILM peeling. So PFCL was removed to stain the ILM again with the brilliant blue dye. Once I have done that, aspirated the excess of brilliant blue, put the PFCL to plan PFCL ILM removal under PFCL. We went from around the edematous retina towards the center, not to cause any further iatrogenic damage to the fovea and perifoveal region and the macular area. And this we peeled up to the arcades, and from then it is the reverse flap was used to plug into the or stuck into the tear area, the crescentic tear which was present in the perifoveal area. But one need to be very careful when you are operating on edematous retina. Sometimes can cause further iatrogenic tears or cause tissue laceration and other things. So gently it is, the ILM easily came off, and we plugged the ILM into the hole. Then the PFCL was exchanged with silicone oil as a tamponade. That's it. It's an edited video. Oil was used as a tamponade for this case.
Thank you, Sunil. I think we are moving to that area when probably ILM can close all the holes and tears in the retina. So probably in future we will think of doing a peripheral ILM peeling and put the peripheral hole closed. So in our future retinas we will show like this kind of if possible. Dr. Arora.
Maybe you will have an ILM bank coming up somewhere. Order the ILM.
That will be the Aurora ILM.
ILM bank. You are planning for that.
No, but excellent surgery, Dr.
Very good surgery.
Very difficult case. Very well managed.
Yeah.
Very elegantly done.
Very elegant, yes. And your hands move very.
Hats off. Hats off to Sunil. Hats off. It's really good.
Sunil, what was the? Do you have a post-op picture? It would be interesting to see the.
Yeah, because a 2 minutes video, I didn't show it. Probably I'll share it with you.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering if Srinivas was here for such a large base, Srinivas may have used a graft for such case. I don't know, primary graft.
Yeah, probably that would have been. But again, this is the way forward. I think we can have a future discussion whether the graft or the peeling. These are the technique. So the question comes when the fovea involves and the non-foveal involvement. So when the fovea is not involved, probably the putting graft is much more safer. Or even you can add the graft also. You can put the laser marks. So so that to avoid this kind of large retinal tear to create further complication. So we have only 3 minutes left.
Dr.
Yeah, please.
What was the visual recovery like with the scarring?
He had a 1/60 vision, sir.
I think Rupak, you have to present. We're waiting for Rupak's video.
No. This is we'll do it, sir. It's just a 1 minute video. Yeah. So thank you all. I'll just present it now. So this is a case when I did a routine buccal surgery for a regmentogenous retinal detachment, scleral buccal surgery for a regmentogenous retinal detachment. But what happened after some time for the recurrence, then I thought it's a young patient of not to do a vitrectomy, and there was a fish mouth opening, and the recurrence is because of that. So revision buccal was another process which has been we used to do earlier. But do we have any other technique of doing it in a different way? So what I did is I will show you. We did a needle drainage through the scleral buccal area, and then we did the laser to that area, and the retina is very well settled. Let's see it. So the chandelier, I have put the chandelier so that the whole surgery, we have this is the edited part, and you can make out that I was just trying to, this is the indentation first, and followed by here the needle is coming out through this in the subretinal part. Sorry, the video quality is not that great, but you can make out the needle was there. And then slowly my assistant was withdrawing the fluid, subretinal fluid. Gradually you can, this amount of the fluid has come out, and I can see the retina is very well settled. And in that area we have put initially one chandelier was put, and then later I made one more sclerotomy to go and do the laser in that previous break area. So I thought that this is a simpler way we can handle this kind of recurrence when you have a there is not much of PVR changes and then the early part, so you can get away with this. So a quick comment from others.
Very nice and innovative technique. And was there a buckle in place here earlier?
Yeah. Yes, the buckle was in place. So the only tips I would like to share it here, and I think the only thing is that what I did, I had a metal depressor. So with that metal depressor, I just where I have the maximum amount of the fluid, so I went there, and with the with the metal depressor guide, 26 gauge needle, I have passed through it. So through the buckle, I have gone into the subretinal space and just taken it out.
Rupak, this was a non-vitrectomized eye?
This is a non-vitrectomized eye.
It's a buckle eye.
This is a buckle die. This is a buckle die. So I just, but it is very difficult otherwise also to go so deep through that buckle, through that buckle area. I have penetrated through the buckle and then gone into choroid, sclera, choroid, and then subretinal space. So unless until you have a very good guide and indentation properly, then it is difficult.
26 gauge.
Jinal will just finish it up. Jinal will just 30 seconds.
Yes, no problem, sir.
26 gauge needle, Rupa?
Yeah, 26 gauge needle. It is with the 26 gauge needle, and because it's a more stouter needle.
It will be firm enough.
I think the
Dr. Ajay Arora sir as a guide for suprachoroidal injection, maybe that can be modified for this particular kind of technique. Sir, your comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to say that there are two things which can be done in such a situation. One is to use a suprachoroidal buckle, which I've been trying. If we can do it, we are not getting the right material. But obviously, this can easily be done with the same guide. You can go inside with a 30 gauge needle, where in the correct space, and you can actually connect it to your exclusion and aspirate.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for being with this excellent session, and we would like to see you all again for the next AIOS.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful session.
Thank you.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rupak.
Thanks a lot. Great.
You all are welcome, and this is wonderful because of you all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chairperson. Thank you so much, Speaker, for keeping it on time.